Part 2 Guys. 10 a.m. Izuku stared at the dull red of the alarm clock for a long time. He had been staring at it since it had first turned to 9 an hour ago. But it didn't feel like an hour. He should get up. The hotel he was staying at required people to be out by noon. Not that he had anything to pack. With a dull groan, Izuku sat up in the bed and then immediately flopped down to press his head into his pillow. Everything hurt. He was so tired. He hadn't slept at all last night. He had showered twice, trying to get rid of the itchy uncomfortableness that spread over his entire body, and when that proved fruitless, he spent the rest of the night alternating between crying, screaming into his pillow, turning, and just fuming over what had just happened. This was all her fault. If she hadn't broken her promise, none of this would have happened. But this was fine too. He didn't need her anymore. It wasn't like she supported his dreams. She only offered support for her dreams. Join a sports club. That'll help him in college. Join a gym. Fit students had better job aspects. Get a tattoo so he could become a hero. Lies and broken promises. Anger spiked and Izuku pushed himself off the mattress. He couldn't lay in bed all day. There were things he needed to do. There was no point going to high school. Finals were over and he was accepted into Tokyo U, and it wasn't like he had any clubs or friends to really make going back appealing. Besides, if his mother was looking for him, that'd be the second place to look. It was why he didn't bother going to Katsuki's place. Their parents were better friends than they actually were, so Mitsuki would probably just snitch on him. Standing, Izuku grabbed his clothes and glared out of the hotel room window as he got dressed. He needed to find a place to stay. Something more permanent than a hotel room. But the problem with that was that he was 17 and he'd need to have someone financially back him. Normally that'd be a parent or proof of employment. Maybe he could talk to the university into not only giving him a dorm late but also letting him move in early. Money shouldn't be too hard of a problem. He could, in theory, just go to that fight club again and earn some cash using his quirk. But that was illegal, wasn't it? Betting on fights, quirk-based fights in general, there was a reason it was hidden under a warehouse. Besides, would he even be let in without Ori or Tanaka? Item might let him in. Actually, he seemed to be a pretty popular contender last night, so he might be able to just walk in if he somehow introduced them to Raijin first. Izuku sighed and looked at his bare chest for a few seconds. Raijin was currently on his back and asleep. At least one of them got some rest. If I had had you a few weeks ago, things would be so much different. The fight with the robot last night had proved that. It had sealed the fact that he could have been a hero if only he had been given a chance to use his quirk's full potential. If his mother hadn't destroyed his chances, he'd be going to UA and he wouldn't have gone to that underground fight club. Hell, they wouldn't be fighting. He recessed his forehead against the still cool glass and let out a long sigh before putting on his shirt. It still smelled new from last night, but he'd need more than a single shirt and a pair of pants if he was going to live on his own. His stomach let out a low growl and reminded him of the growing sense of hunger he had been feeling since last night. Alright, he finished getting dressed and examined the room one last time. Food, a place to sleep, and figure out how to earn some cash. Again he was brought back to that underground fight club. It wasn't just that it was easy. There was a bit of exhilaration that brought him back to that spot every time he thought about needing cash. He had been so powerless throughout his entire life that now that he could put up a fight, he wanted more. Was that why he wanted to be a hero? Izuku shook his head and slapped his cheeks. Right, now's not the time to think about this, let's see where. He reached into his pocket for his phone. It wasn't there. Where was it? Other pocket. Did he leave it on the nightstand? Where? Oh, he threw his phone into the river last night. He still wasn't sure if that was smart or stupid. Could he even get a new phone without his mother knowing? Maybe from a different company. With one last look back, he left his hotel room and headed out into Greater Tokyo. There was a lot he needed to do today and less time to do it. But first, food. 4x. Izuku half stumbled into the first ramen shop he found and promptly ordered the largest bowl he could. Part of him was concerned about his now very limited budget, but his stomach was currently trying to eat that part. The bowl was served and Izuku took a few giant bites of the toppings before slurping up the noodles. Yo, Izuku. A slightly jovial voice brought a hungry Izuku out of his bowl just long enough to see a short orange-haired guy in a suit. He looked familiar. Wait, wasn't this that gate guard for the Yakuza? I've been looking all over for you. Izuku blinked and finished his bite. Why? He blinked again. And how did you find me in the middle of Tokyo? There's like millions of people here. True, but, the orange-haired man took a seat next to him without even asking and ordered a bowl. We have our ways. Okay. Izuku turned his attention back to his bowl of ramen. Who are you again? What? You don't remember? I'm Sho, the guy that let you and Tanaka in. I remember that part, I just forgot your name, sorry. Izuku gave Sho another look and wondered how exactly this guy was a Yakuza member. He wasn't as scary as Tanaka or Ida. He just seemed like some friendly young guy. Well, I remembered yours, Izuku Midoriya. There it was, that emphasis on his last name again. And as for why I spent all night looking for you, only to bump into you as you were heading in for ramen, well, the answer is simple, Granny wants to meet you. Granny. Izuku blinked, he heard that name before. Is she the boss or something? Sho gave a small nod, his cool confident smile was smug as all hell. She didn't tell me why, but she's eager to meet you. And I think I can guess why. Why? Curiosity is one hell of a bait, I think if you want to find out you'll have to come with me. Sho's attention was instantly stolen by the bowl of ramen that was placed before him. After we eat, of course. Don't worry, Mr. Heavyweight Champion, I'll sponsor your bowl too. By the time Sho had finished his first bowl, Izuku had finished his second. 4x. Once again, after a fight with his mother, Izuku found himself entering the Yakuza compound tucked into the heart of the Amagi district. Butterflies filled his stomach as he followed Sho. A few members he never met looked at him with curiosity and a bit of malice in their eyes. Was he in trouble because he won against the mech? That was Ori's idea. Was she in trouble? Wasn't she important? It kind of felt like she could just do whatever the hell she wanted. The worst part was that even if he did get in trouble because of her, he'd have to forgive her to get another tattoo. Damn it. Why the hell was he here? So you're still not going to tell me why I'm here? Izuku asked as he glanced around the courtyard. He could see the path that would lead him to the koi ponds and Ori and Tanaka's house. There were a few other paths between the buildings that likely led to somewhere else into the compound, but the main building was positioned in front of him. Traditional in every sense of the word, Izuku watched as Sho took the first few steps onto the wooden pathway that enclosed the courtyard. Nope. That'd ruin the surprise. Sho plopped off his shoes and held them up for Izuku to see. Shoes off, head down, and be respectful, you're meeting a Yakuza leader after all. Right. Something that was perfectly normal for a 17-year-old future Tokyo U student to do. Just having a casual meeting with a Yakuza leader. The room was traditional in every sense of the word. A large empty tatami mat floor surrounded on all sides by walls displaying the group's history, from ornate samurai swords to water-painted wall scrolls that looked beyond beautiful and old photos. There was an unspoken significance of this long room, and nothing seemed more significant than the raised platform at the end with a few sitting cushions placed in front of a large wooden circle with a phoenix burned into the middle. Was that this group's symbol? Did Yakuza have symbols? Why didn't he research more about them after being involved with them? Oh right, he threw his phone into the river last night. A crowd had gathered around him, some faces Izuku knew. Ida and Tanaka hovered around the sides, leaving him in a sea of Yakuza. No one dared approach him for whatever reason. Was he going to die? If that was the case, he wished they'd just get this over with. What's? He heard Ori's voice and looked behind to catch her peeking into the room for a moment. Her long silver hair was tied into a ponytail that was kept in place by a baseball cap that had slots for her horns. Both her and her denim overalls were covered in paint. She looked at him and tilted her head to the side again. Izuku. She took a few steps towards him, her sandals effortlessly flying off behind her. She kneeled down beside him and examined the room. What's going on? I have no idea. Oh, what did you do? Well, last night you took me to a fight club and then I won, and then my mom kicked me out last night and I threw my phone in a river. How'd your mom find out? Someone sent her a video. That's weird, but that doesn't explain why you're. An older man stepped in front of them, his kimono was nearly black, and his gray hair still had enough black in it to make his hair look like salt and pepper. His face was firm, dignified, and cleanly shaven, though his skin was a fair bit darker than what Izuku was used to seeing in Japan. The man squatted down in front of Izuku and examined him carefully. After a moment he smacked his lips. I'm not impressed. Huh, was he supposed to be impressive? A few snickers came from the other Yakuza members and Izuku couldn't help but feel this was just some elaborate prank. Wakan, Ori gave a light giggle. That's mean. Besides, you haven't seen Raijin yet. Wakan shrugged and pressed a finger into Izuku's chest. You. Wakan. A clap drew everyone's attention away from Izuku and Wakan and towards an elderly woman. Get out of the way, and stop glaring at everyone, you're giving us a bad name. And speak in whole sentences while you're here. We know you're not a foreigner. And Ori, stop being so clingy and let me have a look at him without your dorky face in the frame. Yes, Granny. Ori spun away and stood barefoot next to her brother and Ida. She looked more out of place than he did. An elderly woman smiled down at Izuku. Her black and white kimono made the bright red flowers on it stand out like they were floating. She held herself with the kind of supreme confidence that Izuku would expect the leader of a nation to hold. Her kind face was wrinkled slightly but still held a youthful playfulness that helped hide the strength of her smile that lacked the usual fragility of someone her age. Her hair was a fluffy black that was pulled back into a ponytail with only a sliver of white on the side. She reminded him of a lone tree definitely growing on a seaside cliff as though it enjoyed being whacked by salt and winds. My, she said in a soft tone, head tilting to the side. How you've grown. Though I can't say your father did you any favors giving you my unruly hair, honestly I'm nearly into my 60s and it still won't behave. Though, you did get his eyes at least. Izuku felt his mouth drop as he stared up at this woman. This oh so familiar woman. He'd seen her before. Well, she asked in a playful tone holding her arms out wide. Are you going to make an old woman kneel down or are you going to give your grandmother a proper hug? Izuku? Memory surged forth of a time when he was barely old enough to talk. He remembered holding onto this woman's kimono as he stared out at a storming night, wondering when his dad was going to come home. A tear escaped him as he hugged her tight. Her smaller frame was too stubborn to even budge under his weight as she wrapped her arms around him. I've wanted to see you again for so long. His grandmother whispered softly. We have a lot to catch up on. Wait. Ori shouted and bounced over to them. She looked around the room, her mouth opened like she was a little stupid. Are you two actually related? My name is Hanabi Midoriya because I chose it. Ori, now get. Grandma Hanabi waved her hand and gestured towards the rest of the members too. The rest of you best have something more important to do than to interrupt my family time. As a group, the rest of the Yakuza slowly began to filter out of the room until only Ori and Tonka were left. Holy shit. Tanaka groaned and slapped his forehead. I'm an idiot. Yes you are, but we can talk about you not telling me Izuku's last name right nowish. Ori grabbed her brother's arm and dragged him out of the room as well. Well, Hanabi gave a light chuckle, her eyes looking a bit misty. I'm sure we have a lot to catch up on. Izuku, why don't we go for a walk? And then I threw my phone into the river. Hanabi let out a small chuckle. Her left arm was hooked with his right, and she patted his hand slightly as they made their way through the well-tended garden that was hidden inside the Yakuza compound. Smart move if you didn't want to be tracked, but if you didn't want the data on there to be found, you should have cracked the shell first. They make cell phones so durable these days. It's both a blessing and a curse. Right, his grandmother was the boss of a Yakuza family. Still, Hanabi gave a soft hum as they stopped at a beautiful collection of flowers. For that girl to act like that, she might have been worse off than I feared. Perhaps I should have attempted to reach out to her more. She gave a kind, grandmotherly smile and gave him a wink. Besides sending you cash for your birthday. Izuku let his grandmother's arm slide through his own as she kneeled down to look at the flowers. I suppose this is a bad time to mention I never got anything from you. Not surprising. Hanabi continued to poke at the flowers for a moment. Well, I wish our reunion was more cheerful than it is, but I suppose you've gone your entire life not knowing part of who you are. And that's a long time, even for an old lady like me. She rose with more ease than his mother would have and smiled at him. But, starting with the past will get us to the now so we might properly look to the future, She straightened her kimono and began to take a few brisk steps past him. Come on now, best not to dawdle in my garden, half the plants in here are poisonous, and the other half will get you higher than a kite. Izuku tore his hand away from the red flower he had been drawn to and took a much better look at the garden. Oh, so that bush he thought might be a pot plant was a pot plant. His grandmother let out a sharp laugh and he chased after her. So, is this your garden? I said as much, didn't I? Besides, an old lady like me needs a hobby, and gardening does more for me than any narcotic ever could. She led him up along a short path before they arrived back at the main building. It's soothing, and creating new life is the best way to get over the loss of life. At least, it is for me. But there's a good chance I might be crazy. They took their shoes off and entered a smaller version of the large meeting room he had first met her in. They sat at a small wooden table, so worn with use that there were rings where someone had placed a cup of tea every single day. Overlooking the garden and the small pond at its heart, it almost felt serene. After a moment, another member appeared to deliver a letter, a pot of tea, and 2 cups. I had this whole plan about what I was going to say to you, but the moment I saw your face, I saw my son, and all of that went out the window. Hanabi sat up slightly, pouring each of them a cup with the kind of grace that came with a lifetime of such pours. So, I suppose we should start with Hisashi. Mom never told me much about him. Just that he could breathe fire, and that he died on the job. Izuku looked at the tea and took a small sniff before he took a sip. Spicy, bitter, and somehow sweet. But, it was also good. His grandmother gave a soft smile and nodded. Technically that's right, but she sold everything so short. She probably never told you that he had tattoos either. He shook his head no. Makes sense, she probably saw some sort of a connection between tattoos and, Hanabi gestured to the air around her, everything that happened here. Well, your father had an abundance of tattoos. He loved his ink, just like his own father did. She winked and chuckled at him. A bit poetic that a family filled with men that loved to ink themselves would produce a boy that needed ink for his own quirk. Your father, my son, Hisashi. He was strong-willed and honorable. It was because of him that we enjoy the power and influence we do today. When your mother said that he could breathe fire, she was only saying part of his quirk. He could set his body on flame, and fight like a devil and even regrow a limb, though, he only had a chance to regrow a finger once. He earned the nickname, Salamander, with our numerous enemies at the time. Apparently, that's some fire lizard. He sounds like a badass. He wasn't a villain, was he? Izuku asked. The idea of his father being a hero felt impossible, but he needed to know if his father was a villain. The question gnawed at him. His grandmother gave him a firm look before she took a sip of her tea. Izuku had never felt so much disappointment radiate off of such a simple gesture. I'll forgive your ignorance, Izuku, but don't think that we're villains. Your father was certainly not. If anything, he was closer to a hero, especially for those close to him. He was a force to be reckoned with, and his only weakness was some green-haired waitress he met by chance. She smiled again and winked. That is, until they had a green-haired baby boy that meant the world to him. To me as well. So his father was neither a hero nor a villain. So what did that make him? A yakuza. Was that better or worse than either of those? So, what happened to him? You were so little when it happened, I'm not surprised you don't remember. Hanabi's face fell hard as she winced at whatever painful memories she was recalling. You were 3, maybe 4 at the time. But, perhaps you've read about it in your textbooks. A deep steady sigh escaped her. What do you know about the efforts to purge villainous organizations that All Might spearheaded? Oh, Izuku felt his shoulders slump. That's when Ori and Tanaka lost their father too, right? A short nod. So they died fighting All Might. He muttered mostly to himself. Hanabi let out another sharp laugh. Against him? No. She leaned forward, a vicious smile on her face. Are you ready for a real history lesson? Sure. Oh come on, be more excited Izuku. This is your family history we're talking about. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, I want to know about your real history. That's more like it. She took a rather smug sip of her tea and raised a delicate eyebrow at him. What the officials don't want you to know is that there were Yakuza groups that fought alongside the heroes and the police. What? Izuku felt his jaw drop. Why? A common enemy. She waved her hand like it was no big deal. You see, for us Yakuza, we thrive when there's order, and, likewise, the law is better when we're the main source of unlawfulness. She gave a big cheesy grin. At least that's what this crazy old Yakuza lady thinks. But, way back when, 3 Yakuza families banded together with the police and heroes. The Amagi group, the Shihasaikai, and the Tokyo clan. Today, those are the only 3 Yakuza groups left in Tokyo. Hanabi gave another chuckle. I know it might sound like we were simply taking advantage of the situation, and in a way we were, but there was more to it than that. My husband, that old man leading the Shihasaikai, and the brat in charge of the Tokyo clan, the 3 of them agreed that this was something that needed to be done, not just for the good of our own families, but for Tokyo as a whole. What happened? Izuku asked, sitting forward slightly to listen to his grandmother's story better. Who were they fighting against? A man called All for one. He was the Dark Lord of the underworld of the time. Nearly every villainous or criminal enterprise at the time answered to him, so when All Might showed up and started to reduce the crime, the 3 of us decided to switch sides. But even with All Might and police doing the heavy lifting, we still suffered casualties. Hisashi was among them. I think something broke in Inko that day. I could see the heartbreak in her eyes, and I couldn't blame her for wanting to run away. Besides, I had not only my own grief to deal with, I found myself in charge of the Amagi group. I had to guide us and make us stronger, find the gaps in the laws that the police would ignore because it was better to have an organized crime than a chaotic one. A lot of stuff made sense now. Hanabi. Grandma. Thank you. Thank you for telling me what happened. Your family, Izuku, and more than that, you're the son of my son. She reached across the table and smiled at him, a kind grandmotherly smile that felt like how freshly baked cookies smelled. If you ever have a question, don't be afraid to ask me. He gave a light shrug. I kind of need a place to stay. Bahaha. That you do. Don't worry, we have more than a few spare rooms in this place, and I've already told the guards that you're allowed in and out as you please. She pointed a bony finger towards him. So take some time and try to relax. That is, relax as much as one can after getting Ori's attention. No kidding, first time I met her I spent the entire night almost passing out of pain as she put a tattoo on me. The second time she pulled me to a fight club and I got kicked out of my house. Oh, and this would make a third time. Do me a solid and try not to end the world until I'm dead. She leaned back and pulled out a small pipe from her sleeve. Izuku watched as her thumb ignited into a colorful blue flame before she lit the pipe and took a small puff out of it. So, is there anything else you want to know? What should I do about Mom? Hanabi took a long slow puff of her pipe and looked out towards her garden. I'm a spiteful person, Izuku. Part of me wants me to keep you away from her as long as possible, just like she did to me. But, I'm also too old to be thinking that way. My opinion though, give it some time, mull it over, let her come to you. I'll send Sho out to make sure she knows you're safe. You're pretty wise, Grandma. I better be, I'm old as shit. So, I do have one question. She raised an eyebrow and locked eyes with him. Can I still be a hero? I mean, I went to a fight club, and he was cut off by his grandmother's laughter. Your family is Yakuza, Izuku. The door's open for you, but you're not one of us yet. Besides, there are a bunch of heroes that are members of the Yakuza, some big names too. And there's a lot more that have blood ties with us. Can you tell me who? That'd spoil the fun. When they show up next, I'll introduce you to some members. Maybe. Hanabi shrugged again. Well, if that's all, I'll show you to an empty room and give you a chance to settle in a bit. Then we're going to have a barbecue. She raised an eyebrow and looked him up and down. We'll get you some new clothes tomorrow. What else you need? A direction in life? He asked with a shrug. And a laptop. It'd help with school. Hanabi gave another bubbly laugh, and Izuku felt ready to ease into his life at the Yakuza compound. Ah, Ida extended a slightly elongated hand towards her. His smile was like two straight lines that formed a V. It's a pleasure, Officer Sei. Please, follow Shio, I'll go fetch Granny. Sei shook the man's hand for a moment and found that while his hand was rough, his grip was gentle. The inside of the Amagi compound looked nothing like what she would expect a Yakuza compound to look like. This felt more like some feudal lord's plot of land, or maybe a historic plot of land. Oh my, an elder woman came walking out from one of the side buildings. She was dressed head to toe in a gardening outfit, and she looked like she was shaking with every step. Could this woman even walk without a cane? Shio, dearie, it's been. Quit the act, Hanabi. I know damn well that you can run a marathon. Oh, come now. The change was instantaneous. The shaking stopped, Hanabi corrected her posture, and her eyes went from the near-blind squinting of an old person to the blinding stare of someone that wanted to know why the fuck they were there. What's the point of being a feeble old woman if I can't act the part? PFF'd, I'll give you old and that's about it. Shio stuck his hands in his pockets and met Hanabi's glare with one of his own before the two smiled and let out a short laugh. Shio, it is good to see you. How's your wife doing? Good, good, she's made a full recovery. I think I'll be taking her to the casino once she's up to snuff again. Oh, that's good, I always love taking your money. And I love taking yours. Bribes? What the hell? Were they corrupt? Were they bad cops? Why couldn't she become a hero like her sister? Sergeant Shio. The case. Sei tapped on her badge as though to remind him that they were still cops. Even if they weren't dressed like them. Being investigators had its perks. Oh right, Hanabi, this is Sei Tatsuma, she'll be taking over for me once I retire. That wasn't the case. Please, we both know that you're too stubborn to retire. You'll get bored, lose all your money, and then be back on the force before the new year. Hanabi waved her hand then glanced towards Sei for a moment. But what's this she said about a case? Right, Shio kicked a stone in the ornate path and planted both hands in his pockets. The thing is, we got a mother that seems to think you kidnapped a kid of hers. So, do you know who Izuku Midoriya is? Hanabi let out a sigh that seemed to age her 20 years before she shook her head and tossed off her mud-caked gloves. Honestly, that troublesome daughter-in-law of mine. She called you. Wait, you actually know something about this? Shio asked with genuine shock written all over his face. Of course I do. Hanabi threw her hands up into the air and began to stomp down a side path. Come with me you two. Hurry, my patience just got shorter than my husband's dick. And he's a corpse. Nearly jumping at the vulgarity of the crass woman, Sei found herself following her through the compound. They broke away from the main building and she found herself crossing a bridge over a koi pond that led to a standalone home. She glanced towards Shio, who could only shrug in response, but the look on his face told her that this was not normal. Oi, Ori. Bring Izuku out here. Now. We're busy. A younger, but no less crass, voice echoed from inside the building, followed by a muffled scream of pain. Oh come on Izuku. Be a man. Canvases aren't supposed to. Ori. Right now. Hanabi tapped her foot on the ground. Shuffling came from inside the house and Sei found herself palming the edge of her pistol for just a moment. Her heart was pounding. What was that scream? Were they torturing him in there? A tall woman with snow-white hair and two horns that ended in red tips jumped out of the house. The loose clothes she was wearing were stained with various inks and clung to parts of her body. A glowing red eye glanced towards them before she stopped in front of Hanabi. Who are they? Is Tanaka in trouble? Ori asked, glancing between everyone at least once, and is it really so bad you couldn't let me finish? You know how. I know you want to get back to work, but let these people see Izuku before you two get back at it. Hanabi waved her hand. Oh, was this a relationship thing? A fit boy came stumbling out from the house, his shirtless form partially covered in sweat and his face a deep red. Ah, it was a relationship thing. On the boy's left shoulder, partially crawling down his arm, was a blackened lizard highlighted in red and wreathed in flames. It moved like it was real, but it had no depth and it appeared to be stuck. Sei pulled out the photo she had been given and sighed a breath of relief. This kid was an exact match to Izuku. She watched as Izuku pulled on a t-shirt, and she caught a further glimpse of the creature on his shoulder. It was a tattoo, that is, an unfinished tattoo. That could explain the scream of pain, right? And that Ori girl, was she a tattoo artist? What's going on, Grandma? Izuku asked. Looking more than a little bewildered, Ori hovered around him, flapping her arms in anticipation. And who are these guys? Grandma. Wait, Hanabi did call Inko her daughter-in-law a moment ago, right? How'd she miss that? Oh right, still a bit wobbly about just walking into a Yakuza base like it was a park. This is Sergeant Shio, he's a drunkard gambler, a cop, and an old friend. Hanabi gestured towards both of them with the flick of her wrist. The girl is say something, she's his replacement. And they're here because your mother reported that you were kidnapped. The look that crossed Izuku's face made it very clear that he wasn't with his mother right now by choice, which muddied the lines between right and wrong. Technically, a 17-year-old was able to live on their own, and many did so long as they had financial backing from their family. Which Izuku was receiving from his grandmother. I'm sorry, Izuku let out a sigh and went to move his arm but winced in pain and rubbed his left shoulder slightly. My mom kicked me out a couple of days ago, and I haven't talked to her since. Ah, so that's what's going on. Shio clapped his hands. Alright, case closed. What the hell was with this shitty cop? Sei let out a sigh and stepped towards Izuku. So, just so we're clear, you're not being forced to stay here. No. Izuku looked between Ori, who nodded yes, and Hanabi, who nodded no. No, I can leave whenever I want. And Grandma took over. Sorry for the trouble. It's no problem. Sei held up her hand and watched as Ori began to tug on Izuku's arm like some incredibly needy lover. But, why would your mother kick you out? Izuku let out another sigh. Because I got a tattoo. Ah, that felt petty. Sei, come on, we're done here. The kid is safe and with family. There's nothing we can do here, though Hanabi, you might end up getting a call from child services if Inko continues to raise hell over this. Shio let out a grunt and looked back towards Izuku. Make it easy on us and give your mom a call. Izuku nodded. 4x. Sei reclined into the seat of their unmarked car as Shio drove them back to the station. Her heart was still pounding. Sure, everyone she met today had been nice, but these guys were still Yakuza, right? And she was supposed to be the one to deal with them in the future. She glanced towards Shio and let out a sigh. Do you think that Izuku kid will be alright? Absolutely. Shio gave a slow nod. And you would do well to form a good relationship with him. Huh, why? Because he's her grandson, and if I know Hanabi like I think I do, she's already grooming him to be the next leader of the Amagi. Hisashi the Salamander. The more Izuku heard about his father, the more he wanted to meet him. He wanted to judge what kind of man he was. Everyone, even the most jaded of the elder Amagi members, had an abundance of things to say about him, most of it good, some of it bad, but all of it was spoken with a fondness and a wishing that he was still here. Both for Izuku's sake and the sake of the Amagi as a whole. Hisashi was to be the next leader of the Amagi. He was their hope for the future. And while Hanabi had done her best and had earned every ounce of respect possible, there was a hushed tone that things would have been better if an entire generation hadn't been wiped out. And none spoke louder on this than Hanabi herself. A sharp pain on his right arm brought him out of his thoughts with a hiss. He glanced towards Ori, who was completely absorbed into the work of art she was tearing into his arm. And that's what it really was. A tearing. Ori's quirk functioned by slicing bits of flesh with a knife or a needle and then replacing it with the color she wanted and then burning it back into place. The pain was like getting a paper cut from a lemon and then cauterizing the wound with a fire poker. She had claimed his entire right arm for her next project on him. An entire sleeve made up of dozens of smaller tattoos to make some kind of a flowing piece of art, right now she was etching an orchid into his upper arm with beautiful crystalline water pouring out of it. Power-wise he had no idea how practical it would be. But Ori was passionate about it, and that would make it powerful in its own right. Probably. The way their quirks intermingled with each other was beautiful, chaotic, and terrifying. Izuku took a breath and stared out into the koi pond that served as Ori's and Tanaka's yard. The large multicolored fish swam peacefully in the dark pool of water with a few plants either floating or sticking out of the water. A creature dove into the ground creating a mound of animated dirt that looked like it came out of a painting and then moved along the ground, headed right towards them. The trail of dirt behind it quickly faded to its original undistributed form. The moving dirt was completely unfazed by the wooden bridge that crossed the pond. With a pop like the crackling of a fireplace, a blackened figure leapt from the animated dirt and then back into the ground. The ground bubbled in front of them for a moment before out crawled his newest tattoo. Far smaller than Raijin, and even smaller than Izuku himself, with 6 stubby legs and a burnt black body that was highlighted by red that oozed heat. The salamander looked at him with a wide derpy smile with its orange flame tongue flopped out of its mouth dripping sizzling orange lava onto the ground. Its thick heavy tail slapped the ground with enough force to make the rocks around it jump. I know what you want to call him, Ori said in a soft voice, not once tearing her eyes off of his arm, her needle still ripping apart his arm piece by piece. He was made with a name after all. You just need to give it to him. I know. But, should I? Won't that be weird? I mean, he was dead, wasn't he? Wouldn't that be strange? Nope. But, not weird. Izuku sighed and then smiled at the salamander, who tilted its large flat head at him and panted like an overly excited dog. You want to be called Hasashi, don't you? The tail slapping on the ground doubled in speed and Hasashi crawled forward, climbing up onto Izuku before he merged with his arm and moved his way up towards his left shoulder where he took his resting position and turned into an inanimate tattoo. The choice to get a salamander was one born of sentiment and desire. He wanted something to remember the man he knew nothing about. He wanted that connection between this place that his mother had been hellbent on erasing. He still needed to call her. It had been over a day since those cops had come looking for him. The rage he felt at her actions had nearly driven him up a wall. What kind of logic was it that she kicks him out and then calls that he was kidnapped? What was her goal? To get him back? To punish his grandmother? He didn't understand. Can we take a break? Izuku asked. He looked towards his shirt and the cell phone that rested on top of him. The phone was new, just like the laptop and clothes his grandmother had purchased for him during a shopping trip. Apparently, even if his grandma ran the Yakuza, the idea of him going to Tokyo U filled her with the kind of pride that just made her want to spoil him. One sec, Ori continued to etch a tattoo into his arm with a wide frantic smile on her face. There was a good chance that she would continue to aimlessly add bits to his arm until one or both of them fell asleep. The concentrated look on her face and the way her hair fluttered in the wind reminded him that she was probably the prettiest girl he ever talked to. And also the craziest. Ori, he half whined. I need to call my mom. Yeah, just one more little, and done. She jumped up and tapped on the first addition to his right arm. There. It's so awesome watching the water flow like that. Seriously, why is your quirk so cool? I just wanna doodle on you all day. She jumped and spun out onto the pathway. Her black sweater was long enough that it completely covered her short shorts, making it look like she was running around without pants. But, I should probably get things ready for class. See ya. Yeah. Izuku watched her sprint back inside her house before he stood and glanced at his phone again. When was the last time he had to hand dial his mother's number? Ever since he had gotten his first phone, she had simply been mom in his phone, his first contact. With a sigh, he dialed her number and walked along the wooden walkway as he let the sounds of the compound overtake him. The first ring brought with it a calmness that he welcomed with open arms. This was just a check-in. That's all it was. He was old enough that he had no real power over him. Any attempt to force him back with her would be bogged down in courts long enough for him to be an adult. Hello. Her voice sounded so frail. And the calmness inside of him vanished as a flash of anger rushed through him. He grit his teeth and forced that anger back. Hi, Mom. It's me, Izuku. Izuku I crossed a line. He hissed. He heard her gasp and then silence. You kicked me out, Mom. You denied me a part of myself, in more ways than I knew. You never let me get a tattoo for my quirk, and you never told me about Dad. I'm sure you have your reasons. But I have my reasons too. He tried to keep his voice calm. He had no idea if he was successful. I got a new tattoo. One to remember the dad you never told me about. I'm still going to Tokyo U. But, I won't be coming home. I'm going to stay here. With Grandma. The dial tone began to play in his ear. Did she hang up? Did the call drop? He stared and looked up at the cloudy sky for a moment. I love you. 4x. What did she say? Nothing. Izuku sat in the same room that he and his grandmother had their talk before. The sound of the rain amplified the atmosphere of the traditional style room and made that freshly brewed tea his grandmother seemed to love smell all the better. They weren't alone this time, as that dark-skinned man with gray hair like a lion's mane Wakan was joining them, a scowl on his face and his arms crossed. The look Wakan gave Izuku made him feel like he was being graded on every choice he ever made, and he had made nothing but mistakes. That's frustrating. Hanabi lowered her head and frowned. Hopefully some time apart will give her a chance to clear her head. She knows where you are, so have her put in the effort. The gate will be open for her. Izuku could only nod. It was weird, half the time when he thought about her he was angry, the other half he was calm. He both missed her and never wanted to see her again. The only thing that he was certain of was that bumping into Tanaka that day had been one of the best things that happened to him. But, today, I'd like to talk to you about your future, Izuku. Hanabi gave a small calm smile. You see, I've been thinking about what you've said to me. About what you don't know what you want to do, and your question about being a hero. The smile she gave him removed a lot of the pressure that those ideas held. Her calmness showed that she really wanted to help him and could, as opposed to his own mother's normally nervous jittering at the idea. I'm aware that the school has counselors to help you make this choice, but they're probably going to push you down some soulless path that doesn't interest you and you'll end up dropping it and turning into a bitter old woman. Hanabi blinked and then pointed a bony finger towards herself. I'm talking about myself, by the way. I figured. Izuku shrugged. And thanks. It's been bugging me for a while now. I'm not sure what I want to do at Tokyo U. Law would be interesting, I guess, but I don't think people would trust a lawyer with tattoos. Bunch of tasteless fools to steeped in tradition if you ask me, Hanabi growled, slapping the table twice. They just don't respect good art and Ori's doing an amazing job with you. She let out a hum and scratched her head. Though, just being able to tell those old hags at the saloon that my grandson is a lawyer would shut them up something good. But that doesn't answer what he wants, Wakan said in his low voice that was like walking on gravel. I know that. Hanabi spat and slapped the table again. Let an old woman daydream a little. I've always wanted to be a hero, he spoke softly, almost not sure of the words himself. He did want to be a hero, but it felt stranger than ever to announce that. But, Hanabi asked, pressing her fingers down into the table next to him, her eyes snapping onto him with a cold hard determination. When he didn't answer she sighed. There are many reasons why people want to become a hero. Most will say they simply want to help people. All Might is the only one I can think of that truly wishes that. Some do it for their egos, their own ambition, and so others will recognize them. That's why most people are heroes, I'm afraid. Some just enjoy the power. They like to fight, to prove that they are stronger. And then, there are some that simply wish to fly. They desire the freedom to use their quirks and express themselves with it. Oftentimes, those with this desire that fail to become a hero, instead become a villain. Hanabi crossed her arms and looked up at the ceiling. It's not so black and white. Some have bits of each, and they all claim to the first one. But, they all have their own reasons for becoming a hero. So, Hanabi's gaze felt like the entire world was focused on him. Why do you want to be a hero? His mother had asked that exact same question. But it was different. Why do you even want to be a hero? That memory still felt fresh. Back then he had a reason. He wanted to be like All Might. But, now, you don't have to answer right now, Izuku. Hanabi placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it gently. The answer might not even be that important. In the meantime, because I have a troublesome grandson that's eager to go to my fight club, Wakan has offered to train you. I'd hardly call it an offer. Wakan huffed and glared at Izuku, his lip curling in a snarl and his broad shoulders seemed to shake. You're making me do it, and I'm making him. Semantics. Point being, Izuku, Wakan, has agreed to give you some combat training if you're interested. Despite how he looks, he's actually a capable fighter, and because of his quirk he's better than most. Quirk? Izuku asked, looking towards the gruff man that was likely going to be the second greatest source of physical pain soon. I can copy and share memories. Wakan held up a finger to his temple and pulled out a small cloud-like wisp that seemed to be fading rapidly before it vanished. It's hardly free, everything in that memory gets transferred. The emotions, the pain, everything. It's no substitute for actual training, but it'll get the job done. Right, and I'll send Ida to get Red Line. He's a hero that was friends with your father. Izuku looked between his grandmother and Wakan. Thank you. For giving him a chance. A chance, huh? Was that why? Hell was a man named Wakan. The wooden practice sword he had been clutching with all his strength was twisted from his hand. With an open palm, Wakan struck Izuku in the chest and a new memory played in his head. A moment just like this. The sword being ripped out and tossed to the side like it was butter and the pain of a hand twisting awkwardly. Izuku hit the ground twice and found his mind hazy from having his failure doubled over again. Izuku glanced up at him, a mixture of hate and fear swelling inside of him as he stared up at Wakan. The man's wild gray hair was flared out around his face, making him look like a lion pretending to be a man. Wakan's hard black eyes were filled to the brim with anger and frustration. Pick up your sword. Wakan gave Izuku a small glare before he turned and walked back to the starting position. We are not done. Why? Izuku grabbed the sword and felt his entire body numb with pain for a moment, like it didn't want to take another step forward. Why do you keep sending me those memories? What good would it do for him to fail twice or more every single time? They are failures. Wakan entered the same one-handed stance he had been using the entire time. The wooden sword he used was battered and bruised, but it was only a distraction for his real weapon, that empty calloused hand that might just be able to take anyone down with a strong enough memory. Okay. Izuku stumbled into his spot and held his practice sword with two shaky hands. Why do you keep sending me failures? Isn't it bad enough that I keep? Oh, believe me, I have complete confidence in your ability to fail. Wakan roared, signaling the start of their bout. A massive wild swing from the sword came down. The bruise on Izuku's shoulder remembered all too well the strike that bore it. The first time he hadn't been prepared, the second time he had barely gotten his sword up. But failures make you stronger. Blocking alone wasn't enough. Izuku brought his sword up and caught the strike as he moved to the side, deflecting it just enough to dodge out of the way. And then there was Wakan's palm. It would come straight on and slam into his stomach. He stepped back and lowered his sword again, whacking Wakan's hand to the side. Now what? Strike. Step back. Hesitation. Wakan shouted. Pain. The round pummel of Wakan's sword slammed into his side and forced Izuku to the side, the bouncy tatami mats cushioning his fall into a rollback onto his bare feet. Wakan did not relent. That wooden sword was coming down hard and fast once more. When you fail, make certain you fail forward. You learn from it. You grow from it. There is no better way to learn than to fail. Over and over again until you find what works. Block and dodge. Parry. Attack. Izuku pressed his sword forward and bumped it into Wakan's shoulder. The strike was awkward, more a tap than anything else, but it was the first time Izuku had landed a hit. Wakan glanced towards the wooden practice sword like it had somehow deeply offended him and then removed it with a light push. A smile that on anyone else would have been a snarl graced Wakan's face as he got back into his fighting stance. Congratulations. You have learned from your failures. Okay. Izuku nodded and held up his sword again. But, wouldn't it be easier to just... No, you are not the first to ask me that. Wakan struck and this time Izuku blocked and pushed him back. Skills and technique, things that are earned through failures, even with natural talent. You fail and fail and fail until you learn, then you fail some more and learn some more. Wakan struck again, This hit once again striking Izuku's blade with enough force to wrench it from his hands. A hand grabbed Izuku's head and he felt a new memory flood into him. A phantom strike to the hand followed by a kick to the stomach. Every failure I have given you has been their last failure. The final failure before they succeeded and learned. Wakan stomped over to the discarded sword and then tossed it back towards Izuku. With me, you will fail twice as fast and learn even faster. But, why can't I use my quirk? Fool. Wakan scuffed and glared towards Izuku. Do you know what the difference is between a criminal and a villain? Izuku felt his entire body blush as he had forgotten for a moment that he was being trained by a criminal. I'm not a villain. I never said you were. Wakan gave a long enough and rested both hands on his sword for a moment while eyeing Izuku. Nor should you think of us as such. We have honor, and so did your father. But do you know what makes a villain a villain? Using a quirk to commit a crime, cause destruction, or just do evil. He half muttered. Despite knowing the answer, he couldn't help but feel like he was wrong. That's correct. Of those three, most law enforcement and heroes only care about the last two. Destroying things is probably the one you'll get hit with the hardest, though, being evil is different. Unfortunately for you, you have a large flashy quirk that can easily be used for destruction. Besides, if your giant monkey is off fighting, your body would be defenseless, won't it? Izuku nodded. A lot of what Wakan was saying made sense. Good. Now then, back to the matter at hand. Wakan held up his sword once more and Izuku felt the bruises on his body whine. Are you ready to fail? He held up his sword, gripping it in both hands. Yes. Then you are ready to learn. 4x. Kaga Heights was the name given to a group of buildings that bordered the Amagi district, though they could hardly be considered heights, given how they were among the shortest of all the buildings around. The top floor of the building served as both the home and agency of the pro-hero Red Line. While not a direct member of the Amagi, Red Line was more of an associate, or at the very least they had a mutual understanding that the Amagi couldn't mess with him, and he wouldn't mess with them. Or at least that's how it used to be. A few years ago, Red Line stumbled into the casino and quickly accrued a large debt, and a hero in debt was a valuable asset for the Amagi. Ida glanced up towards the top of the slightly pink building that stood out like a sore thumb from its surroundings. It had been a while since Red Line had done anything of note besides showing up to the casino, losing his money, and stumbling home drunk. The old hero was probably one close call away from retiring. Honestly, Ida had no idea why Granny wanted to talk to him, but, if Granny said jump he'd ask how high. He hummed and tapped his sheathed sword on his shoulder before making his way into the building. I'm sure Granny has a plan for him. Just like she did with Izuku. You want me to come with you? Tanaka asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. Like always, he seemed to draw attention with his bright red skin. Sure, most people were polite, but it was hard not to notice the large, well-dressed man that looked like a demon. I'm not sure why you even followed me, to begin with. Ida gave a slight chuckle and tilted his head back towards Tanaka. Having Tanaka around all but guaranteed a fight, but it also guaranteed a victory. But no, stay here. Oh, in case he tries to run. Got it. Tanaka took a wide stance, one that was ready to spring in any direction at a moment's notice or fall on his ass. Ida could only smile and nod before he headed into the building. Red Line's agency was on the top floor, and the building had just enough floors to require an elevator. It wasn't until Ida got to the top floor of the building that he felt something was off. The air was chilled and filled with a kind of static, but that could just be a side effect of the knot that was growing inside of his stomach that was telling him to turn back. Which was all the more reason for him to go forward and look danger right in the face. With a hand on the hilt of his sword, Ida strode forward, long straight, and firm steps guiding him towards his destination without disrupting his form. Iron. Slightly sweet. A smell Ida was all too familiar with. Blood. And a lot of it. The door to the office was opened, a few scattered papers had made their way into the hallway. Silence fell over the world as Ida made the last few steps to peer into the hero agency. Red Line's longtime partner was laying in a pool of their blood, the office phone in their hands. There were signs of a struggle, but not nearly enough of one. Near the back of the office, Red Line lay, eyes wide, barely breathing, a hand outstretched towards his partner. You and your partner chose your last words poorly. A large muscular man dressed head to toe in combat gear jabbed a jagged and worn katana into Red Line's heart, forcing the light from his eyes. The hero world will be better off without corrupt heroes like you. The man stood. While Ida still had an advantage in height, the man easily had the more muscular build. A sharp chin, a wide sinister smile, wild black hair, and eyes that showed either too much sanity or not enough stood out as the face of someone that had thrown away their humanity. A red scarf and equally long white headband flowed behind this man as he stood to address Ida. For a moment, Ida felt fear. He felt far more fear than he ever had felt in his life, and he shook like the last leaf on a tree. All it took was a breath and he was steady again. This frightful aura was nothing compared to what Tanaka could put out. The man walked forward, intent on leaving without even saying hello. With his sheathed sword, Ida barred the man from leaving, earning him a serious glare. That man owed the Amagi a lot of money. The man laughed. Amagi? I haven't heard that name in quite some time. I guess I didn't kill enough of you. The hair on Ida's back stood straight. Who are you? Stain. The hero killer. Ah, I see. Well then, Stain, since you've taken the life of one of our debtors, I assume that you'll be the one to take over his debt. It only seems fair. The conflict may well have been written in the stars. Metal clashed against metal as Stain brought down his sword with two hands down upon Ida, only to be met by Ida's blade, the sheath of which had slammed into the window behind him hard enough for it to crack. Even with his quirk helping him keep his sword straight, Ida could feel the raw strength this man possessed. Stain withdrew to ready for another strike, but Ida lunged forward, striking sideways towards Stain's side, who met the blade with a smile on his face. Ah, I see you're more than just some street thug carrying a katana to be cool. Oh please, Ida snorted, if you start talking about studying the blade I might just cringe to death. That'd be a shame. It's been far too long since I bothered to kill a Yakuza. You all should have been wiped out years ago. Even with one hand, Stain's strikes were still nearly impossible to block. One hand, what was? Biting steel slid across Ida's abdomen as he felt Stain's knife barely graze him. Two could play at that game. Ida drew his second sword and slashed upward, barely hooking his sword onto one of the many thick teeth of Stain's dagger. With a quick jerk backward, he wrenched the blade from Stain's hands. Not bad. Stain laughed and struck again. Even with one hand he could easily strike as hard as Wakan could. He tossed a dagger at Ida's face. It's almost a shame you're Yakuza scum. Ida expected Stain to move back and strike again, but instead, he lunged forward, sliding past Ida and into the hallway behind him. But not without cost. With two perfectly straight cuts, Ida stuck down onto Stain's back, only to be blocked by that sword again. Just what on earth was with this superhuman strength? He, the way you swing your swords, that's your quirk, isn't it? Stain laughed as he grabbed the dagger Ida had tossed behind him. A long lizard-like tongue slithered out of Stain's mouth and wrapped around the dagger, licking up the blood. What a creep. That's right, my quirk isn't anything special, it just allows me to make straight lines when breathing became hard, his arms felt sluggish. And his legs felt like they were made of rocks. Your quirk. That or you're just freezing up. Stain gave a light laugh as he moved forward, that dagger gleaming in the fading light. Congratulations, you get to die with some wannabe heroes, I guess that would make you some wannabe Ida. Tanaka came barreling around the corner with all the force of a rampaging bull and slammed into Stain with enough force to send the muscular man tumbling back down the hallway. Ida. Tanaka looked towards him, his tiny black eyes were widened to the maximum as his broad chest puffed and huffed. I saw you break the window. Are you okay? Why aren't you moving? Who was that guy? Did he take the stairs? Stupid question. Of course, Tanaka would run up several flights of stairs and barely be winded. Stain's quirk. Ida barely muttered, he found himself smiling. Paralysis. With Tanaka here he was safe. Stain on the other hand was in for the fight of his life. In addition to being a natural brawler, and most people barely being able to fight Tanaka thanks to his frightening appearance. His quirk was something of an enigma, and so far it hasn't been given an official name, but at the same time, the quirk was as simple as Tanaka. Unless he was beaten in a single hit, Tanaka would not lose a fight. He lived for fights. It was why everywhere he went he ended up getting into some brawl or another. Ori called it, "too stupid to die," and that was a pretty apt description. There was no way someone like Stain could ever hope to beat Tanaka. "Oh shit, that guy ran away," Tanaka muttered as he peered down the hallway. "I wanted to beat him up for stabbing you." Or Stain could do the only smart thing against Tanaka and run away. Revenge was like eating a poisonous pufferfish. Prepared by an amateur, it would lead to a painful death, but if prepared by a professional, there was nothing more satisfying. Hanabi smacked her lips as she stared at Ida, his head bowed low and his suit still bearing the cuts from his encounter a few hours ago. They had been so close to losing one of their most reliable members, and right now was the worst time for something like this. She had just gotten Izuku, and the Amagi could hardly suffer the inconvenience right now. And her ancient bones were telling her this was just the beginning. The other members, many of whom were old bastards with one foot in the grave, glanced at her like she was supposed to fix everything. It took everything she had just to keep things running smoothly and prepare for the future. "Tell me his quirk again," she said in a cold voice as she placed a firm hand on her knee to stop it from shaking. Rage was tearing through her like a forest fire as she thought back to her husband and the self-righteous prick that used the chaos to murder so many of her friends and family back then. "He licked my blood and I was paralyzed." Ida kept his head low, not by her own command, but by the overwhelming sense of honor the boy carried with him everywhere. It was good that he lived. Izuku was going to need an ally such as him in the future. He even took a risk to get the knife back to do so. Stendhal. So she was right, and that prick hadn't died years ago. Well, if they're really Stain, I'm not sure we have much to worry about. He's called the hero killer for a reason. We'll just have to warn Fourth Kind and Gang Orca and hope that they're able to deal with him. Hiruzen scratched his chin and let out a long sigh, though, him showing up might make things harder on us with more cops and heroes running about. Hanabi gave a small nod and sighed. "Send someone to them right away. Unlike Red Line, we can't afford to lose either of them. And I want everyone here on high alert, too." "Do you really think he'll target us?" Ukai asked. His wizened and cracked face showed far more life in it than his body actually had left. "He's the hero killer. Most of you old shits should know better than that," she snapped, glaring at them all as she felt the heat of her quirk flare up around her. She let out a breath of hot air that made her eyelashes curl. "Think back. Stain's killed Yakuza before, he's killed our own damn members before. Just because that son of a bitch has a different name now doesn't mean he's not that same bastard Stendhal that took advantage of the chaos and murdered just as many of us as that prick all for one did. Her husband was among the first he killed. We're going to treat this as a declaration of war," she said firmly and glared out past everyone towards the Tokyo skyline. They had been far too passive for far too long. No doubt if those scavengers in the Tokyo clan heard about this, they'd take the chance to strike and claim even more territory. They were already far too close to the casino than Hanabi liked. "Reach out to all the heroes in our territory, tell them what happened, and that we'll be investigating him as well." "But how do we find him?" Hiruzen asked. "He's been wanted for years now, and if the police haven't been able to. Did you lose your spine along with your hair? If he's still here, we'll find him or he'll find us. Everyone travels in groups of 3, and if possible, we'll have Tanaka fight him." She grabbed the fabric of her kimono and bit her lip for just a moment. She wanted to tell him to bring that bastard alive so she could burn him to a crisp herself. But that was risky. You find him, you kill him. End of story. She couldn't risk losing Izuku to that monster. So much rode on him, but he wasn't ready yet. And there was no way in hell she was going to risk Izuku to a monster like Stendhal in the hopes it would help him grow. Every time she spoke to him, she could feel that he was being pulled closer into the family. He wanted to help people, especially those he cared about. She just needed a safe way to show him that he didn't need to be a hero to do that. An ambitious leader that wanted to do the right thing was exactly what the modern Yakuza needed in the world of heroes. That, or she was just going senile. Granny. Sho's soft voice brought her attention to her right as the well-dressed boy with beautiful orange hair kneeled down beside her. He looked nervous, rare for someone like Sho who had more time than anyone to hone his skills. He held up one hand to signal to her and the others that what he was about to say was urgent. The clamor that had filled this room was drowned out so only the general popping and creaking of old-timers could be heard. A branch of the Tokyo clan has started attacking our members north of the casino. Her bones were screaming at her that they told her so. Of course those punks would start with this shit now. In her anger, she stood, a wing of flame extending out of her arm for a moment. Send Wakan. Take Tanaka and push those self-righteous punks back across the river so far they'll be in China. There went her plans of having Tanaka protect Izuku and Ori. Also, Sho said in his usual calm voice. He pulled out a small vial that he was keeping in his pocket. We found someone trying to sell this in our territory. They said they got it from the Shihasaikai. Her hand shook as she grabbed the vial. She knew exactly what this was. The vial held a dose of trigger, a quirk-enhancing drug that could make even weak quirks strong, all at the cost of a bit of sanity. To say it was illegal would be an understatement. Every country in the world had a ban on the stuff, and there was an entire international group targeted at eliminating its use. To be caught with the stuff was to instantly be considered a villain, and to distribute the stuff, let alone manufacture. That was a one-way road to a cozy cell. Damn that old fart. Hanabi roared and handed the vial back to Sho. Get rid of that, and someone get me in contact with the Shihasaikai. When it rained, it poured. And right now it felt like a goddamn monsoon. 4x. Izuku wasn't exactly sure what he thought about Ori. Sure, he thought that she was easily the hottest girl to ever know his name, and there had been a few cute girls in his high school class. But Ori just had this dangerous beauty to her that was just amplified by the controlled craziness she showed off. And she wasn't afraid to show off either, especially her tattoos, which meant that Izuku was very familiar with the simple, undeniable fact that Ori had some top-tier thighs. And he wasn't even a thigh guy, he was more of a boob guy, not that Ori didn't have boobs. She did. She was probably the bustiest girl to ever talk to him. But, just thinking that she was really attractive didn't really define what he thought about her. And sure he liked her. But, why? Was it just because they spent so much time together? Because she was pretty? Because she was always excited in her own slightly malicious way whenever she saw him? Was it because she gave him tattoos? That last one might be a big part of it. The way their quirks just worked together felt like it was more than just a simple coincidence. But, maybe, it was her passion, her wonderful bubbly personality that was both frustrating and endearing at the same time. To top it off, she was easy to read. When she was bored, her face all but shouted it, and when she was interested in something, her red eye would glow slightly. But despite all those positives, she was also really bossy and just enough of a bitch to be called bearable. And she appeared to enjoy causing people pain and misery. And while he'd call Ori a friend, he wasn't sure if that's all she was. Part of him, that horny hormonal teenager part, wanted to know what it was like to kiss her. Ori hummed as she brushed off his bare arm. At this point, his right arm was well on the way to being called a proper sleeve. The detail felt like something out of a movie, and he could recall every leaf painfully carved and colored into his arm as Ori did her thing. By this point, he was pretty numb to the pain, as if he completely forgot his arm existed. All right. He watched as Ori sat her needle down and then stood to stretch. The flowing black sundress she was wearing twirled as she spun, her tall stature allowing her fingers to touch the wooden beams of the awning. That's enough for today. She bounced, spun, and danced as though to get every single joint of her body moving. She pulled on her ponytail and pulled it loose, letting her pure white hair flow freely down her back before she shook it back into place with a wide smile on her face. I work any more on your arm and my brain's going to go blah, and then I'll go blah, and then I'll make blah, and then you'll be like blah, and then we'd be like blah, and then I'd just go super ultra blah. And that's not fun at all. Izuku blinked before he grabbed his shirt and began to put it back on. He was still sore from Wakan's training earlier, but he was starting to feel pretty good. Especially his arms, but oddly enough, his right arm didn't hurt quite so much anymore. Did Ori's quirk heal the skin it altered? That made sense. So you're saying that if you keep working on something, you'll get burned out? Yeah, pretty much. Breaks are super important. She placed a hand on her stomach and twisted her face slightly. Hey, since they're having a meeting about boring stuff, why don't we go get some food? Oh, and go to the movies. I haven't done that in forever. Dinner. And a movie. Was this a date? Come on. It's no fun going by myself. And my friends are, actually, do I even have any of those? Ori pulled his arm and then stopped, one eyebrow raised as she looked at him for answers. Do Ida and Sho count? Izuku asked, stumbling to his feet as Ori dragged him away from the only exit he knew of in the compound. And your brother? And where are we going? Shortcut. Ori proclaimed without a care in the world as she bounced over to the wall that surrounded the compound. A small ladder was placed against the wall that would allow for someone to climb over. And I guess they count, but Sho's always busy, which is weird because he never sleeps. And Ida is, well, he's close, but he was never the closest to me and Tanaka. Who was he close with? Izuku watched as Ori climbed up the ladder first, completely unafraid that he might look up her skirt. Ori stopped at the top of the ladder and pulled herself up onto the wall, then looked down at him for just a moment before turning to face the daylight. Our older brother. She took a few whimsical steps along the wall before she looked down the other side and jumped. The loud banging told Izuku that she had landed on something. He scrambled up and quickly saw the container. She had used a stepping stone to get down onto the street and he followed after her. Can I ask you about him? He asked when he caught up to her. The aimless way she was walking made him just a bit worried. Sure, I guess. I mean, I'm sure someone would tell you if you asked them. Ori balanced along weaving around the street posts with ease. And it's not like it's a secret or anything. We just don't like talking about it. Especially Ida. Why? Was he close to your brother? Yep. Ida was my brother's best friend. And Ida loved my brother a lot. She turned and looked at him with one bright blue eye. With all the homo. Huh. Izuku blinked before realization hit in. Oh, Ida's. Yep. But, my brother wasn't, so it was kind of awkward for him. Eventually, though, my brother got married. I think she was from some other family or something. I didn't get to spend much time with her, but, eventually, something happened to our brother and his family. Ori stopped at the corner, hands behind her back as she looked up at the sky between the towering buildings. A tear slid down her face. I don't know the details, but, apparently all three of them vanished. 3. Izuku asked, standing beside her. Would it be too much to brush the tear off her cheek? He extended his hand out but stopped when Ori wiped it away on her own. Yeah, they had a baby girl. She kind of looked like me. Ori gave a great big cheerful smile. The light changed before he could say anything, and she grabbed his arm, pulling him across the street. Now come on. I think there's a good movie showing soon. And I want to get a giant popcorn. Maybe two. His stomach agreed with that. Felt Raijin moving along his body. He might not be able to bring Rajian out in such a small space, but he could bring out a part of him. Living mural. Fist of the Thunder God. With a roar that would make Raijin proud, he pulled back a clenched fist before he swung forward. Izuku felt the other sleeve of his shirt explode as his arm was completely enveloped by one of Raijin's massive meaty fists. Sparks tingled as his fist slammed into Stendhal's stomach with the sound and force of thunder. The brick wall Stendhal slammed into shattered, but he still stood, his eyes a pure, milky white. What the hell was it going to take to bring this guy down? Izuku. He looked away down the narrow street to see someone running towards them, but the voice was familiar. It was Sho. Stendhal lunged to the side, running past Ori as she crawled out from the trash. Before Izuku could even think to move his legs, that monstrous murderer had vanished into the darkness. Sleep would not come easily knowing that he was still out there. But, at the same time, Izuku couldn't help but smile. He had won. Holy shit, Sho ran up to him and looked at his outfit. I swear, you're lucky I'm good at finding people. You both look terrible. A few drops of rain caught Izuku's attention more than the already numbing pain in his shoulder. Then the downpour happened. Seriously, you two, don't go running off. Sho pulled out an umbrella and handed it to Ori. Follow me, the car's not too far away. Part 2 over, guys. I don't feel the need to repeat what you guys already heard several times in other vids.